A starving German Shepherd puppy crawled beneath retired Navy SEAL Graham Vale's porch before sunrise. He was too weak to bark, but he still carried a torn strip of cloth between his teeth. Graham brought the little shepherd inside, warmed him by the fire, and believed the rescue had ended there. By morning, 6 more German shepherds were standing silently beyond his cabin steps. Their exhausted mother ignored the food, walked straight to the rescued puppy, then turned back toward the snowy tree line. She stopped once, looked over her shoulder at Graham, and waited for him to follow. Stay with Graham and this loyal family to the end, and discover why sometimes compassion begins when one small rescue asks you not to stop there. The morning after the storm looked almost too beautiful to be honest. Whitefish, Montana lay under a clean sheet of winter light. Snow covered the roof of the old cabin, softened the split-rail fence, and turned the pine woods beyond the property into a wall of white and dark green. Farther down the slope, the lake was frozen in wide silver plates, catching the pale sun as if the whole valley had been polished during the night. Inside the cabin, the world was smaller. A fire murmured in the stone fireplace. Coffee steamed in a black enamel mug on the kitchen counter. The only sounds were the soft crack of burning wood and the slow movement of a man who had learned not to waste motion. Graham Vale stood by the window with one hand around the mug and the other resting against the frame. He was 55 years old, 6'1", with the broad shoulders and solid build of a man who still trained because stopping felt more dangerous than aging. His body was not bulky, not showy, but firm and controlled. The kind of strength that came from discipline more than vanity. He had a masculine American face, clean-shaven, angular, with a strong jaw and a calm, severe mouth. His hair was cut in a neat undercut, dark at the base but silvering heavily at the sides. Even alone in the mountains, he kept himself clean and orderly. That morning, as always, he wore a long-sleeved green camouflage set, fitted close enough to show the shape of his frame without looking theatrical. The shirt was tucked properly, the cuffs were straight, his dark boots were placed squarely beneath him. Everything about Graham looked steady, only his eyes told the truth. They were deep, quiet, and sad in a way most people noticed but never mentioned. The people in town respected him. They called him polite, private, reliable. They said the former Navy SEAL kept to himself because some men simply preferred silence. They were wrong. Graham had built silence the way other men built fences. Years earlier, during his final operation, he had followed an order to withdraw while a teammate was still trapped behind them. The report said Graham made the correct call. The commanding officer said he preserved what remained of the unit. The medal in his drawer said he had served with honor. But none of those things woke with him at 3 a.m. What woke with him was the broken voice on the radio, the call sign fading under static, the feeling of his boots moving away while every part of his soul had wanted to turn back. Since then, Graham had trusted very little that needed saving. He turned from the window, reached for his coat, and opened the front door to bring in more firewood. The cold entered first, sharp and bright. Then he heard it. A faint scratching sound came from beneath the porch step. Graham froze. It was not the scrape of ice shifting on wood. It came again, weak and uneven, followed by a tiny breath that almost disappeared under the wind. Graham crouched slowly, his knees bending with practiced control, and looked into the shadowed hollow beneath the porch. At first, he saw only wet fur. Then 2 eyes opened. A German Shepherd puppy lay curled against the frozen ground, pressed into the dark as if the small space had been the last shelter it could find. Its coat was black and tan, though the tan had dulled under melted snow and mud. It was thin, too thin for winter, with long little legs that trembled when it tried to shift. One ear stood halfway up while the other folded softly to the side, giving its exhausted face a fragile, unfinished look. The puppy did not growl. It did not bark. It only looked at him with tired brown eyes that still held a stubborn spark of life. Graham's throat tightened before he could stop it. "Easy," he said, his voice low from disuse. "I see you." The puppy blinked. Graham took off one glove, reached forward slowly, and waited. He knew better than to grab a frightened animal, especially one that had survived long enough to hide. After a moment, the puppy stretched its nose toward his fingers. Its breath was cold against his skin. "You picked a hard night, little one." The words landed strangely in the cabin air behind him. Graham rarely spoke aloud unless he had to. He eased the puppy out from beneath the porch and gathered it into his arms. It weighed less than it should have. Its small body shivered against his chest, but it did not fight him. Instead, it pressed its face into the front of his camouflage shirt, as if that smell meant something. Inside, Graham laid an old towel near the fireplace and placed the puppy on it. He expected the little dog to crawl toward the warmth or the kitchen, where he was already moving to heat milk. But the puppy did something else. It lifted its head, sniffed the air, and dragged itself toward the old military coat hanging beside the door. The coat had not been worn in years. Graham stopped with the pan in his hand. The puppy reached the coat, pushed its nose into the hem, and gave a soft sound, not quite a whine, not quite relief. Then it closed its eyes for 1 second, as though it had found something it had been trying not to lose. A chill moved through Graham that had nothing to do with winter. That coat still carried traces of old canvas, gun oil, field soap, and weathered storage. To Graham, it smelled like a life he tried not to remember. To this starving puppy, it smelled like safety. Or like someone else. He warmed the milk carefully, testing it against his wrist before filling a spoon. The puppy was too weak to drink fast, so Graham sat on the floor, one knee raised, feeding it slowly. Spoon by spoon, breath by breath. The firelight touched the puppy's damp fur and brought out the faint gold along its cheeks and chest. "You need a name," Graham murmured. The puppy's half-folded ear twitched. Not a big one, not yet. He looked at the tiny paws, the stubborn eyes, the way the little creature had survived the storm and still refused to give up its scrap of hope. "Pip," he said. "That'll do for now." Pip swallowed another spoonful of milk, then rested its muzzle on Graham's wrist. For a long moment, Graham did not move. The simple weight of that small head opened something inside him he had spent years holding shut. It was not happiness, not exactly. It was more frightening than that. It was responsibility, trust, the quiet, dangerous feeling of being needed. And Graham did not know whether he deserved to be needed by anything living. About an hour later, when Pip had stopped trembling and the towel beneath him had warmed through, Graham noticed the strip around the puppy's neck. It was not a proper collar. It looked like a torn piece of old fabric, twisted through a thin temporary cord, knotted loosely enough that it had not harmed him, but tight enough to stay with him through the storm. Graham worked it free with careful fingers. A small patch of cloth came loose. It was dark, worn almost gray in places, with a line of faded blue stitching along one edge. Not decorative, functional, the kind of stitching used on old training bags or field gear. Pip's eyes flew open. The puppy lurched forward with a weak urgency that startled Graham. One small paw landed on the cloth, then another. Pip pulled it back beneath his chin and held it there, breathing hard. Graham lowered his hand. "All right," he said softly. "It's yours." Pip did not understand the words, but he understood the surrender. His body eased. He curled around the scrap as if it were warmer than the fire. Graham stared at the cloth. It was just a torn piece of fabric. Yet the puppy guarded it like a promise. For several minutes, Graham sat beside the fireplace while the sun climbed higher outside. He told himself there were simple explanations. A lost dog, a careless owner, a piece of cloth that smelled like food or bedding. But the old part of him, the part trained to notice what did not belong, would not let it rest. The puppy had not come inside looking for food first. It had gone to the military coat. It had protected the cloth. And under the porch in the snow, there had been no human footprints, only the puppy's trail. Graham rose slowly and went back outside. The winter brightness hit his eyes. He stepped down from the porch and studied the snow with the patience of a man who had once read ground signs as carefully as maps. Pip's small tracks came from the tree line, staggered and dragging near the end. But they were not alone. Larger paw prints circled the cabin. Once, twice, 3 times. Graham followed them around the side wall, past the woodpile, beneath the bedroom window, and back toward the porch. They were deeper than Pip's, made by an adult German Shepherd. The pattern was not frantic. The animal had paused at each window, close enough to look in. It had approached the door, turned away, circled again, and finally stopped near the hollow beneath the porch. Graham stood very still. Whatever adult dog had brought Pip here had not been lost. It had evaluated the cabin. It had left the puppy where Graham would find him. And then it had waited outside long enough to make sure the door opened. A low sound came from inside. Graham turned. Through the window he saw Pip awake on the towel, staring past him toward the pines. The puppy was not looking at Graham. It was looking beyond him. Graham followed the line of that stare. At the edge of the forest stood a full-grown German Shepherd, black and tan, tall, thin from hardship, but still carrying herself with a guarded dignity that made Graham's breath catch. Her ears were upright, her chest was lifted, her body was angled toward the cabin, but her weight stayed back, ready to vanish. Even from a distance, Graham could see that she was watching him with the stillness of a trained animal. Not wild, not safe, not asking for help in any ordinary way. For one suspended moment, man and dog looked at each other across the snow. Graham did not reach for the door. He did not call out. Some instinct told him that if he moved too quickly, she would disappear forever. Inside the cabin, Pip pressed both front paws against the window. The adult German Shepherd looked toward the puppy. Then she looked back at Graham. There was no sound between them, only winter light, smoke from the chimney, and the terrible feeling that something had just been placed in his hands without permission. A second later, the dog turned and slipped between the pine trees. Graham remained on the porch until the last dark movement vanished into the forest. Behind him, the fire cracked softly. Inside, Pip gave one small broken whine. Graham looked down at the tracks circling his cabin and felt the old ache in his chest sharpen into something else. Not guilt, not yet. Something closer to a warning. The mother had been close enough to know her puppy was alive, close enough to come inside, but she had chosen not to. And as Graham stood in the clean white silence of that Montana morning, one question settled over him colder than the snow. If she trusted him enough to leave her puppy at his door, what was she still too afraid to bring inside? The next morning, Whitefish looked as if nothing in the world could be wrong. Sunlight poured across the snow in clean sheets of silver. The pine branches held their white weight without moving. Down toward the frozen lake, a line of mist lifted slowly from the ice, thin and pale, like breath leaving a sleeping animal. The storm had passed, and in its place came the kind of brightness that made every dark thing feel more carefully hidden. Graham Vale had been awake since before dawn. He had carried Pip out to the small workshed behind the cabin and turned it into a temporary shelter. The shed smelled of cut cedar, old tools, and the faint oil of machines he rarely used anymore. He swept the floor, laid down canvas tarps, folded 2 wool blankets near a portable heater, and set a shallow bowl of warm water close enough for Pip to reach without standing too long. The little German Shepherd puppy had slept through most of the night, curled around the old scrap of fabric as if it were a heartbeat. In the morning light, his black and tan coat looked softer, though still dull from the cold he had survived. One ear lifted halfway when Graham moved. The other folded sideways, giving him the fragile look of a creature not yet sure the world intended to keep him. "You're not much of a guard dog yet," Graham said quietly. Pip blinked up at him. Graham almost smiled. Almost. He had not decided what to do. That was the trouble. In the old days, action had always arrived with structure. Orders, maps, roles, time marks. Every man knew what came next, even if next meant fear. Civilian life was worse in a way, because the hardest choices came wrapped in ordinary silence. He could call animal control. He could drive Pip into town. He could ask around. But each option pressed against the same place in his chest. Hand him over, step back. Let someone else decide. The thought left a bitter taste in his mouth. He was kneeling beside Pip, checking the puppy's water, when the sound of tires crushed the snow outside. Not slow, not uncertain. A vehicle came up the drive as if the driver already believed he had the right. Graham stood. Through the shed window, he saw a black pickup stop in front of the cabin. It was clean despite the weather, polished enough that the sun flashed along its hood. A man stepped out and looked around without hurry, first at the cabin, then at the woods, then at the shed. He was tall, a little under Graham's height, with a lean, well-kept frame and the posture of a man who spent more time being watched than working with his hands. His hair was dark blonde, brushed neatly back from a broad forehead. His face was handsome in a smooth way, with a narrow nose, pale skin, and a practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. He wore a dark brown coat with a high collar, expensive gloves, dark jeans, and clean leather boots that had no business looking so untouched after a storm. Graham knew him by sight, Calder Rusk, owner of Rusk Canine Development, a breeding and training facility outside town. His name appeared on banners at winter charity events, on donation plaques at the animal shelter, and sometimes in the local paper beside photographs of him shaking hands with county officials. People described him as generous, professional, good with animals. Graham had never trusted descriptions that neat. Calder walked toward the shed with his smile already in place. "Mr. Vale," he called. "Morning." Graham opened the shed door but did not step aside. "Rusk." Calder glanced past him and his eyes found Pip instantly. Something moved across his face, too quick to name. Not relief, not worry. Recognition, perhaps. Irritation, certainly. "There he is," Calder said. "I was told someone up this road might have found one of mine." Pip heard the voice. The puppy's small body stiffened. He pushed backward against the blanket until his hind legs slid. He did not bark. He did not growl. He folded himself smaller, eyes fixed on Calder's boots. Graham saw it. Calder saw Graham seeing it. The smile stayed. "Looks like he gave you a little scare," Calder said. "Pups slip out sometimes, especially after bad weather." "What's his name?" Graham asked. Calder's gaze flicked from Pip to Graham. A pause, not long enough for most people to notice, long enough for Graham. "Ranger," Calder said. Graham looked back at the puppy. Pip did not respond, not a twitch of recognition, not even the confused alertness of an animal hearing a familiar sound. "Ranger," Graham repeated. Calder shrugged lightly. "One of the new litter. We don't get too attached before placement. You understand. It's a business." The words sat badly in the cold shed. Graham did not move. Calder's voice softened, but only on the surface. "I appreciate you keeping him warm, truly, but I need to take my property back now." "Property?" Pip pressed himself lower against the blanket. Graham felt the old, controlled part of himself take over, the stillness before a hard decision. He did not raise his voice. He did not step forward. He only looked at Calder with those deep, tired eyes and said, "He was under my porch half frozen. Lucky you found him." "You missing any others?" Calder's expression changed again, just a fraction. "No." "You sure?" "I keep records, Mr. Vale. I didn't ask about records." For the first time, Calder's smile thinned. Outside, the winter light brightened over the snow, too calm for the conversation happening inside the shed. Calder removed one glove finger by finger, a deliberate gesture meant to show patience. "Look, I know your background. People around town respect you, so do I, but this doesn't need to become complicated." Graham said nothing. Calder continued, gently now, almost kindly. "A man living alone can start seeing things in ways other people don't, especially after what you've been through. I'm not judging. I'm just saying if this turns into a legal issue, questions get asked. Why did you keep the dog? Why didn't you call? Why did you refuse to return him to a licensed facility?" There it was, not a threat made with a fist, a threat made with a file. Graham's jaw tightened. He had faced louder men, crueler men, men with weapons in their hands. Calder was different. Calder stood in a clean winter coat, smiling politely, and reached for the one wound Graham never showed. The possibility that others might look at him and see instability instead of instinct. For a second, Graham felt the old exhaustion rise. Give the dog back. Avoid the fight. Return to silence. Pip made a small sound behind him, not loud, barely more than breath, but it was enough. Graham looked down. The puppy had dragged the scrap of fabric under one paw and was staring at him as if the whole world had narrowed to Graham's choice. Then another voice came from the driveway. "Graham, you home?" Calder turned. A woman in a pale blue winter coat was making her way up from a faded green Subaru parked behind the pickup. She was small and sturdy, 62 years old, with short silver hair curling from beneath a knitted cap and bright eyes that missed very little. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and she carried a canvas grocery bag in one hand. This was Nadine Pierce, Graham's nearest neighbor, though near in that part of Montana still meant more than a mile away. Nadine had once worked part-time as a veterinary nurse before arthritis made long shifts impossible. She had the practical kindness of someone who had cleaned wounds, warmed newborn animals, and delivered hard truths without making a performance of it. Since Graham moved in, she had made a habit of leaving bread, soup, or supplies on his porch without asking too many questions. She was warm, but never intrusive. That was why Graham tolerated her. Her eyes moved from Calder to Graham to the puppy in the shed. "Well," she said, her voice losing its neighborly softness, "that doesn't look like a friendly visit." Calder's posture changed at once. Not much, but enough. He stood straighter, returned the glove to his hand, and put the public version of himself back on. "Mrs. Pierce," he said, "just retrieving a lost animal." Nadine stepped closer and looked at Pip. Her face softened, then sharpened. "That little thing was out in last night's storm?" "Unfortunately," Calder said, "accidents happen." Nadine's gaze remained on Pip. "Funny how some accidents look scared of the person claiming them." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then something shifted outside the shed. Not a vehicle, not wind. Pip lifted his head. From beyond the woodpile came the soft crunch of paws in snow. Graham stepped out first. A full-grown German shepherd stood near the edge of the cleared yard. She was black and tan, larger than she had looked at a distance, with a dark saddle across her back and deep gold along her chest, legs, and face. She was thin, her ribs not sharply visible, but suggested beneath winter fur that had lost its shine. Yet there was nothing weak in the way she stood. Her ears were upright, her eyes were amber brown, steady and intelligent. She held her body between the cabin and the trees, not aggressively, but with absolute purpose. Behind her came 5 puppies. They were small, black and tan like Pip, some darker, some with gold faces and clumsy feet. They did not scatter, they did not tumble forward for food. They lined themselves behind the mother as if they had followed a rule older than hunger. Nadine whispered, "Dear God." Calder did not speak. His face had gone still. Not pale with surprise exactly, pale with calculation failing. The mother dog took one step forward and stopped. Her eyes moved to Pip inside the shed. Pip struggled upright, whining softly, and for the first time since Graham found him, his tail gave a weak, uncertain movement. The adult shepherd did not rush to him. She looked first at Graham. That restraint cut deeper than panic would have. She was asking without asking. Nadine slowly reached into her pocket and took out her phone. Calder noticed immediately. "What are you doing?" "Taking pictures," Nadine said. 6 puppies and a mother dog turning up half-frozen at a neighbor's place seems worth documenting. "They're strays," Calder said quickly. Graham looked at him. "You just said you weren't missing any others." Calder's mouth tightened. "I said no such dogs belong to me." "No such dogs," Graham repeated quietly. The mother shepherd's gaze shifted to Calder. Her ears went back, not flat in fear, not forward in attack, but held in a controlled tension that made Graham's skin prickle. She knew him, or she knew something about him. Pip backed deeper into the shed, but the mother stayed still, placing her body more firmly before the 5 puppies behind her. Calder took one step back. It was the smallest movement. Graham saw it anyway. The man who called dogs property had just retreated from a dog who had not made a sound. "Rehook," Then the mother shepherd did something none of them expected. She lowered her head, picked up the smallest of the 5 puppies by the loose skin at its neck, and carried it to the first step of Graham's porch. She placed it there carefully, stepped back, and waited. Not begged, not fled, waited. The gesture was so deliberate that even Nadine stopped recording for half a second. Graham felt his chest tighten. This was not a stray animal wandering toward warmth. This was a mother making a choice. One by one, her puppies looked from her to Graham, as if they had already learned that survival depended on silence and obedience. Calder saw it too, and for the first time, the polished confidence in his face cracked. Whatever this dog remembered, whatever she had carried through the snow, it was not only hunger that had brought her here. Calder recovered quickly, but not completely. "You can keep your strays," he said, voice flatter now, "but don't expect me to be responsible when this becomes a problem." Nadine lifted her phone again. "You were responsible enough to drive all the way up here for one of them." His eyes cut toward her. The friendliness was gone, though the manners remained. "You should be careful what you involve yourself in, Mrs. Pierce. Misunderstandings can become expensive." Graham stepped forward then, just enough to put himself between Calder and Nadine. Calder looked at him, measuring. For a moment, Graham saw the shape of the man beneath the good coat and clean words. Not a man who lost his temper. A man who kept records, made calls, knew which rumors to start, which signatures mattered, which people could be made afraid. Calder's gaze dropped to the mother shepherd again, specifically to her left ear. The movement was fast, but Graham followed it. Calder turned away. "Have a good morning, Mr. Vale." He walked back to his pickup with the controlled pace of a man refusing to appear rushed. The engine started, the tires crunched down the drive. Only when the black truck disappeared beyond the pines did Nadine let out the breath she had been holding. "That man is not here for lost puppies," she said. "No," Graham replied. The mother's shepherd still stood in the snow. Graham crouched at the porch step, not reaching for her, not crowding her. "I'm not going to hurt them." The dog watched him. Pip gave another weak whine from inside the shed. That sound changed her. Not much, just enough. She picked up the puppy she had placed on the step and carried it toward the shed. The other 5 followed in a careful line. Graham backed away, giving her space. Nadine moved even slower, her eyes wet now, though her mouth stayed firm. Inside the shed, the mother shepherd went first to Pip. She touched her nose to his face, his neck, his side, checking him with a quiet urgency that needed no words. Pip pressed himself into her chest. Graham looked away for a second. It felt too private, too much like forgiveness. He set out bowls of warm water and small portions of food, careful not to overwhelm them. The puppies trembled at first, then began to eat in tiny, uncertain bites. The mother did not touch her bowl. She stood over them, watching the door, Graham, the window, the road beyond. "She won't eat before they do," Nadine said softly. "You've seen that before?" "In good mothers," she replied, "and in trained dogs." Graham looked at her. Nadine nodded toward the shepherd. "See how she checks corners? How she keeps her body between us and the pups? That's not just instinct, that's discipline." When the puppies had eaten enough to slow down, the mother finally lowered her head to the bowl. Even then, she paused after every few bites to look at the door. Graham waited until she settled near the blankets. Only then did he move close enough to examine her without touching. Calder's glance still bothered him, the left ear. Beneath the fur, near the inner edge, he saw a faint line of dark marks. At first he thought it was dirt. Then the pattern resolved. Letters, numbers, K9MR417. Graham felt the air leave his lungs. Nadine leaned in, careful not to startle the dog. "That's not a breeder's mark." "No." "Military?" "Maybe." Graham's voice was quiet. "Or something built to look like it." He took a photo with his phone, zoomed in, and stared at the code until the marks blurred. He knew just enough to know what he did not know. But he also knew this. Calder had seen that ear and decided to leave before Nadine's camera caught too much. Graham scrolled through old contacts. Most names there belonged to a life he had buried, men he had not answered, numbers he had let go cold. His thumb stopped over one name, Wesley Boone, former canine trainer, retired, Idaho. Graham had not spoken to him in years. He sent the photo anyway, no message at first. Then he typed, "Do you recognize this marking?" He hesitated before pressing send, as if sending one photograph might reopen a door he had nailed shut. Finally, he sent it. The day passed slowly after that. Nadine stayed long enough to help Graham arrange the shed properly, then left him with extra towels, a bag of puppy food, and the promise that she had saved every picture she took. Graham thanked her awkwardly. Nadine only patted his arm through the camouflage sleeve. "You don't have to do this alone, you know." Graham looked toward the dogs. "I haven't decided what this is." Nadine gave him a sad little smile. "That's usually how trouble introduces itself." By evening, the shed had become quiet. The puppies slept in a loose pile, bellies full for the first time in who knew how long. Pip lay pressed against his mother, the old scrap of fabric tucked beneath one paw. Graham sat on an overturned crate near the heater, watching the rise and fall of 6 small bodies. The mother shepherd remained awake. Graham had started calling her Mara in his mind before he meant to. Not a final name, a temporary one, he told himself. Something to use until he knew who she truly was. "Mara," he said softly. Her ears shifted, not startled, recognizing the sound as addressed to her. Graham studied her face in the warm shed light. She was beautiful beneath the hardship, not pretty in a pet store way, but noble, alert, worn down, yet unbroken. Her amber eyes carried the exhausting intelligence of an animal that had learned too much about people. He raised one hand, not touching her, and made a small, downward motion without thinking, a signal from another life. Mara lowered herself to the blanket. Graham went still. He had not given a verbal command. He had not meant to test her, but she had understood. The heater clicked softly. Outside, the sunset turned the snow blue. In the distance, somewhere beyond the trees and the road to town, a truck moved along the valley. Mara's head lifted. She did not look toward the puppies. She looked toward Whitefish. Then, slowly, she turned her eyes back to Graham. It was not fear he saw there, not only fear, it was insistence, as if bringing the puppies here had not been the end of her journey, but the only way to make sure someone would finally follow the part of the story she could not speak. Graham's phone vibrated once in his pocket. A message from Wesley Boone appeared on the screen. "Call me." Graham stared at those 2 words, then looked back at Mara standing watch in the shed doorway, her body outlined against the winter dark. For the first time in years, he felt the old world reaching for him. And this time, it was not calling from a battlefield. It was calling through a mother dog who had crossed the snow with 6 lives behind her and a secret still ahead. Sheriff Tessa Marlowe arrived just after 9 the next morning, when the valley was still bright with fresh snow and the road to Graham Vale's cabin had hardened into 2 pale tracks beneath the winter sun. Her county SUV rolled up slowly, not with the impatience of Calder Rusk's black pickup, but with the measured caution of someone who never liked arriving at a scene already shaped by other people's stories. She parked near the woodpile, shut off the engine, and sat for a moment before stepping out, looking first at the cabin, then at the shed, then at the tree line beyond. Tessa Marlowe was 46, tall for a woman, with a lean, capable frame and the kind of posture that made people straighten up before she spoke. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a low knot beneath a sheriff's winter cap. Her face was not soft, but it was not hard either. It had the calm lines of someone who had spent years listening to neighbors lie, grieve, confess, and ask for help in the same small office. Her eyes were gray-green, steady and difficult to impress. She wore a dark navy sheriff's winter jacket over a black turtleneck, practical pants, and snow boots with salt stains along the soles. Tessa was not cruel, and she was not easily moved. That was what made her good at her job. Graham met her at the porch. He looked as he always did, clean-shaven, broad-shouldered, controlled, his silvered undercut neat, his long-sleeve green camouflage set fitted and orderly despite the cold. Only the sleeplessness in his eyes gave him away. "Morning, Graham," Tessa said. "Sheriff." Calder Russ called me before sunrise. I figured he would. He says you're holding animals from his facility. Graham's face did not change. He said property yesterday. Tessa studied him for a second. That sounds like Calder. It was not agreement, not yet, just recognition. She followed him toward the shed but stopped at the door before entering. Graham noticed that. Tessa always paused at thresholds. She looked before she stepped. It was one of the reasons he trusted her more than most people in town, though he would never have said so out loud. Inside, the shed had changed overnight. It was no longer a place for tools and stacked lumber. Graham had swept the floor, folded wool blankets into a wide nesting area, and set the portable heater far enough from the dogs to be safe, but close enough to keep the room warm. The 6 puppies slept in uneven little piles, black and tan bodies pressed together. Pip lay near the front, one half-raised ear twitching in dreams, the scrap of old fabric tucked beneath his chin. Mara was awake. The adult German shepherd stood between Tessa and the puppies before Tessa had taken 2 steps inside. Her black saddle caught the low light, and the gold along her chest looked warmer now that she had eaten. She was still thin, still tired, but there was a dignity in her stance that hunger had not taken. Her amber-brown eyes moved over Tessa's uniform, her boots, her hands, then returned to her face. Tessa did not reach for her. "Smart girl," she murmured. Mara did not wag her tail. "She hasn't slept much," Graham said. "Not really." "Neither have you." He ignored that. Tessa crouched slowly, keeping her hands visible. "I can believe my eyes, Graham, but I can't write a report based on a feeling." "I'm not asking you to." "Yes, you are, just not directly." That landed closer than he liked. Graham looked toward Mara. "She's not his." "Maybe, but Calder has papers, licensing records, transfer documents, veterinary statements. On paper, he looks clean." "Too clean." Tessa glanced up at him. "That's not evidence." "No. And your history complicates this." His jaw tightened. Tessa did not soften the words, but she did not weaponize them either. "I'm not saying that to insult you. I'm saying Calder knows how to use perception." A decorated veteran living alone in the woods refuses to return a puppy to a licensed dog facility. He'll make that the story if you give him room. Graham looked down at Pip. The puppy opened his eyes, saw Graham, and gave the faintest wag of his tail. Graham felt the weight of it like a hand on an old wound. Before he could answer, his phone vibrated in his pocket. The screen showed a name he had not seen in years. Wesley Boone. Graham stepped outside the shed with Tessa following. He answered on speaker. "Boone?" A rough male voice came through, older than Graham remembered, but still firm. "Tell me that photo you sent is not from some internet forum." "It's not." "Where is the dog?" "With me." A pause. Then Wesley swore softly under his breath. Tessa folded her arms. "Mr. Boone, this is Sheriff Tessa Marlowe of Flathead County. I need to know who I'm speaking with." Wesley Boone, retired canine trainer. Contract work for federal and military programs, mostly detection and recovery dogs. "I'm 53, and I've got enough bad knees and old records to prove it." His voice carried the dry bluntness of a man who had spent more years talking to working dogs than politicians. Graham remembered him as broad and compact, with weathered skin, salt and pepper hair cropped short, and eyes that missed small details other people never knew existed. Wesley had never been sentimental in public, but every dog that passed through his hands had remembered him. Tessa said, "Do you recognize the marking?" "I recognize the format. Canine MR417 belonged to a female German shepherd registered as Maribel. Handler called her Mara." Graham looked through the shed window. Mara had lifted her head. "Registered where?" Tessa asked. "A contract canine program that folded 3 years ago after funding cuts and internal review. Dogs were supposed to be evaluated, reassigned, adopted through controlled channels, or medically retired. Could one end up in a private breeding facility?" "Not legally, not with that code." Tessa's face sharpened. "You said belonged, past tense." Another pause. When Wesley spoke again, the bluntness was gone. Because according to the last file I have, that dog died 3 years ago. The cold seemed to deepen around them. Graham said nothing. Tessa looked from the phone to the shed. Through the glass, Mara stood very still among her sleeping puppies. Cause? Tessa asked. Says post-program health decline, medical closure, disposal confirmed. Who signed it? My copy is incomplete. Last page is missing. The digital archive I had access to was restricted after the program dissolved. But I can tell you this much. If that dog is alive, either the file is wrong or somebody made a dead dog very useful. Graham's hand closed around the phone. The words moved through him slowly. A dead dog, alive in his shed, with 6 puppies, and a man like Calder calling them property. Tessa exhaled through her nose. Mr. Boone, I'll need whatever you can send me. You'll get what I have, but Sheriff, be careful with clean paperwork. The dirtier the thing, the cleaner they try to make the file. Graham almost smiled at that. Almost. The call ended with Wesley promising to search his old storage drives. Tessa stood quiet for a moment, the winter sun bright on her jacket. Graham knew that look. She had entered the morning expecting a dispute. Now the shape had changed. Still, she did not rush. That doesn't give me a warrant, she said. No. It gives me a question. It gives you a dead dog breathing in my shed. Tessa looked at him sharply. And if you say that to the wrong person, Calder will make you sound unstable by noon. Graham looked toward the road. That was what made this kind of enemy dangerous. Not force, not violence, not even cruelty in the open. Control of the story. For years, Graham had let official language sit on top of his own memory like fresh snow over broken ground. Correct action, tactical necessity, preserve lives, honorable conduct. None of those phrases had changed the sound of the radio in his dreams. Now Mara stood behind him as another living thing trapped beneath words written by people who were not there. Dead, disposed, closed. He felt anger rise, but it was not clean anger. It tangled with fear. The fear that he would act too fast. The fear that he would wait too long. The fear that every path led back to the same place. Someone trusting him, and him failing at the exact moment trust mattered. Tessa seemed to read some of it on his face. Do not go to Calder's facility, she said. I didn't say I would. You didn't have to. Graham turned away. Inside the shed, Pip stood unsteadily and nosed at Mara's front leg. Mara lowered her head and touched him once, gentle and brief, then raised her eyes to Graham through the window. She was watching him again, not pleading, expecting. Rehook. Later that afternoon, while Tessa reviewed the documents Calder had emailed her, Graham set his phone on the workbench and replayed Wesley's short voice memo describing the old canine program. Mara ignored most of it. Then Wesley said a name. Owen Kestrel was her last handler. Mara rose so suddenly that Pip startled awake. She crossed the shed in 3 silent steps and pressed her nose to the phone. Her ears came forward. Her breath fogged the screen. When Wesley's recording repeated the name, Mara made a sound Graham had not heard from her before. It was not a bark. It was not a whine. It was a low, broken exhale, as if a locked room inside her had opened for 1 second and released a memory too heavy to hold. Graham looked at Tessa. Tessa looked back, and for the first time that day her careful expression faltered. A file could say a dog was dead, but no forged document in the world could teach an animal to grieve a name. The moment passed, but it changed the room. Pip crept closer to Mara, confused by her sudden tension. The other puppies slept on, unaware that the past had just entered the shed through a phone speaker. Graham replayed the memo once more, this time lowering the volume. Wesley's voice continued, giving only fragments. Owen Kestrel, former handler, experienced, respected by some, disliked by administrators, removed after challenging the program's closure process. Tessa wrote the name in her notebook. Owen Kestrel, she said. Where is he now? Wesley didn't say. We'll ask. Graham watched Mara. She had not moved away from the phone. Her nose hovered over it, her eyes focused in a way that made Graham's chest ache. He knew that focus. It was the way memory behaved when it came back not as a picture, but as a sound, a voice, a call sign, a last word. Tessa closed the folder Calder had sent her. His paperwork says the puppy was born in his facility. Pip? He doesn't call him Pip. I know. It also says the mother is an unnamed female from a private line acquired last year. Graham looked at Mara. She has a name. Paper says otherwise. Paper says she's dead. Tessa did not answer. That was the problem. The papers contradicted the animal standing in front of them, but papers had signatures, dates, letterheads. Mara had only a scar of ink in her ear and the way she reacted to a dead past. Graham stepped closer to the shepherd and slowly lowered himself onto the overturned crate. He did not touch her. He had learned by now that Mara accepted nearness better than comfort. Comfort asked too much. Nearness allowed her to decide. You knew him, he said quietly. Mara's eyes shifted to him. Owen. Her ears moved. There it was again. Recognition. Tessa saw it too, but she forced herself back into procedure. A dog responding to a name isn't legal proof. No. But it's enough for me to keep looking. For Graham, it was more than enough. It was a fracture in the wall. He had spent years believing the official version of his own pain because everyone around him had accepted it with polished sympathy. The mission had been reviewed. The decision had been justified. The loss had been filed. But what if some truths did not survive in reports? What if they survived in the body instead? In a man who woke before dawn, in a dog that remembered a handler's name after 3 years of being declared dead. Evening came early. The bright snow outside turned blue, then violet. Tessa left after warning Graham again not to confront Calder. She promised to contact Wesley directly and run the business records through proper channels. Before driving away, she paused at her SUV and looked back at the shed.
I meant what I said, she called. About what? I can't write a report with feelings, but I can start one with questions. After she left, the cabin seemed quieter than before. Graham fed the puppies in small portions, cleaned the bowls, and replaced the damp towels with dry ones Nadine had dropped off earlier in a covered plastic bin. Mara watched every move. When Graham reached near Pip's scrap of fabric, the puppy pulled it back under his chin. Graham raised both hands. Still yours, he said. Pip relaxed. Mara lowered her head and sniffed the cloth. At first, Graham thought she was only checking her puppy. Then she froze. Her nose pressed to the fabric, her eyes changed. She drew in one breath, then another, deeper this time. Slowly, she took the scrap between her front teeth, not biting, not claiming, and carried it to the open shed door. Graham followed. The night air was sharp enough to sting. Mara stood at the threshold, the old cloth hanging from her mouth.
She did not step out. The puppies were behind her. Pip had pushed himself upright, watching with anxious eyes. Mara looked east, toward the dark line of the road that curved down from Graham's cabin and disappeared into the valley. Not toward Calder's place, not toward the forest where she had first appeared. East. Her body held still, but everything in her pointed that way. Graham felt the old instinct return, the one that had once read small things because lives depended on them. Direction, hesitation, wait, silence. Mara was not asking him to chase the night. She was showing him that the cloth carried a direction, a memory, a trail she could not follow yet because her puppies were here, because trust was still new, because fear had taught her patience. Graham looked down at Pip, then at Mara. The fragment of fabric had never been only a comfort object. It belonged to somewhere, or someone, and both mother and son knew the smell. Graham shut the shed door gently against the cold. He did not make a promise out loud. Promises had become dangerous things in his life. But Mara kept watching him, and he understood that silence did not excuse him anymore. Inside the cabin, his phone lit up again. Another message from Wesley Boone. I found the Kestrel reference. Not good. Call in the morning. Graham stood in the dim kitchen with the phone in his hand, the fire behind him and the dark window before him. His reflection looked back, clean-shaven, controlled, dressed like a man still holding formation long after the war had moved on. Behind that reflection, in the shed beyond the glass, a dog officially dead guarded 6 sleeping puppies and remembered a name powerful enough to make her tremble. Graham turned off the kitchen light. For the first time in years, the darkness did not feel empty. It felt like something waiting to be uncovered. By the time the sun rose over Whitefish the next morning, the snow had stopped falling, but the cold had hardened. It sat on the roof lines, glazed the road shoulders, and turned every tire track into a pale scar across the valley. From Graham Vale's cabin, the town looked peaceful in the distance, tucked between white hills and dark pines, with church steeples and storefront windows catching the bright winter light. Peaceful places, Graham had learned, could hide ugly things better than dangerous ones. He stood in the shed doorway with a mug of black coffee cooling in his hand, watching Mara watch the road. The German Shepherd mother had not slept much. She lay near her puppies only when they settled. The rest of the time she positioned herself where she could see both the shed door and the narrow window facing east. Her black and tan coat looked fuller after warmth and food, but the tension never left her body. She did not pace. She did not panic. She simply waited like a guard posted at the edge of a memory. Pip was doing better. The little puppy had eaten 3 careful meals since Graham found him, and the warmth had put a faint shine back into his soft, black and tan fur. His half-folded ear still gave him a lopsided, vulnerable look, but his eyes had brightened. He slept curled beside Mara's front leg, one paw resting on the old scrap of fabric. Graham looked at them and felt the familiar pull in 2 directions. Part of him wanted to load Mara and the puppies into the truck and disappear deeper into the mountains. That was the old instinct. Move first, protect first, let paperwork catch up later. But another part of him heard Tessa Marlowe's warning. Calder was waiting for him to make the wrong move. That was why Graham was still standing there, still inside the rules, though every nerve in his body hated it. His phone vibrated. A message from Tessa. Public records pulled. We need to talk. An hour later, Graham drove into town. Whitefish looked almost cheerful under the morning sun. Storefront awnings sagged under snow. A few people shoveled sidewalks while steam lifted from coffee shop vents. Christmas lights, forgotten from the season before, still hung over Central Avenue, unlit but bright against the white day. Graham parked behind the county office and found Tessa waiting near the side entrance. She wore the same dark navy sheriff's winter jacket, her hair tucked under a cap, notebook under one arm. Her expression told him she had found something, but not enough. "Harold Vane," she said without greeting. Graham followed her inside. The county records room smelled of old paper, floor polish, and overheated radiators. Tessa laid several printed pages on a table. "County Animal Facility Inspections," she said. "Rusk Canine Development. 3 years of clean reports. Same inspector on most of them." Graham read the name, Harold Vane. Tessa tapped the page. 58. County Animal Facilities Licensing and Compliance. He signs off on kennels, breeders, small livestock operations, transport permits, all of it. On paper, he's spotless. What's he like? Tessa leaned back against the table. Polite, church board, Rotary breakfast, gives speeches about community standards. He knows everybody's mother, remembers birthdays, donates to the winter shelter drive, that kind of man. The kind people defend before they listen. Exactly. If photograph was paperclipped to one document, Harold Vane stood at a charity event beside Calder Rusk, both men holding plaques. Harold was a neatly built man with silver hair combed back from a high forehead, pale skin, rimless glasses, and a soft, careful smile. He wore a charcoal overcoat and a red scarf, looking less like a county inspector than a retired judge. There was nothing threatening in the photo. That bothered Graham more than if there had been. Tessa lowered her voice. If Harold's signature is part of this, it means Calder isn't just bending kennel rules. It means the county may have helped make those dogs disappear on paper. Graham stared at the clean lines of the form. Dead, transferred, inspected, approved. Words could be as cold as snow when the wrong hands arranged them. "What do we do?" he asked. "We don't give Calder the mistake he wants." Graham looked at her. Tessa's eyes were steady. "Do not go near his facility. Do not call him. Do not threaten him. If he's already painting you as unstable, anything you do out of anger becomes useful to him." Graham hated how reasonable that was. In his head, memory flashed without permission. A low room, dust in the air, his teammate's voice breaking through static, the order to pull back, the terrible discipline of obeying when everything human inside him screamed not to. "I'm getting tired of waiting while someone else decides what happens to the ones I'm supposed to protect," he said. Tessa's expression softened by a degree, but her voice did not. "Then protect them by not letting Calder choose the battlefield." That sentence stayed with him as they left the county building. Their next stop was a veterinary clinic near the edge of town. Brenner Animal Care sat beside a plowed lot and a row of bare cottonwoods. The building was small, painted cream with green trim, and a brass bell chimed when they entered. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant, dog treats, and wet coats. Dr. Lyle Brenner came out from the back with a clipboard in his hand. He was 57, average height, narrow-shouldered, with thinning brown hair that had gone gray at the temples. His face was long and tired, with deep lines beside his mouth and kind eyes that seemed burdened by too many compromises. He wore a white veterinary coat over a plaid shirt and dark slacks. There was no arrogance in him. If anything, he looked like a man who had spent years trying to be decent in small ways and had slowly learned how expensive decency could become. "Tessa," he said, then looked at Graham. "Mr. Vale?" Graham noticed the man's hands, clean, capable, but restless around the clipboard. Tessa did not waste time. "Lyle, did you personally examine all animals listed in Calder Rusk's transfer health certificates?" Brenner's face changed, not dramatically, but enough. He glanced toward the front window, where winter light made the parking lot almost blinding. "That's a broad question," he said. "It's meant to be." Brenner swallowed. "Calder's facility has been in good standing for years. That's not what I asked." Graham stood back, letting Tessa lead. That too was difficult. His whole body wanted to press, to force the truth into the open. But he had learned by now that pressure could make frightened people close like doors. Brenner took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Some certificates were based on intake records prepared by the facility," he said carefully. "Standard practice in some cases. If a facility is licensed and previously inspected—" "Did you see every dog?" Silence. The bell on the clinic door gave a tiny movement as wind pressed from outside. Brenner looked toward the window again. Across the street, parked near a closed hardware store, sat a dark vehicle, Calder's black pickup. Graham felt the temperature in the room change. Brenner saw that Graham had noticed. His shoulders sank. "You need to understand," the veterinarian said quietly, "this town runs on relationships. A man like Calder brings business. Harold signs permits. People trust them. If someone like me starts making accusations and can't prove every word, I lose the clinic. My staff loses their jobs. People stop bringing their animals here." Tessa's voice remained calm. "No one asked you to make accusations. I'm asking what you actually saw." Brenner looked at Graham then, and guilt moved across his face like shadow over snow. "I saw less than I should have," he said. It was not enough to solve anything, but it was the first crack. Rehook. As they stepped back outside, a woman carrying a terrier in a red blanket passed them on the sidewalk. She smiled at Tessa, then recognized Graham and looked away too quickly. Graham had seen that look before. Not hatred, uncertainty. By noon, Calder's story had already begun moving through town faster than truth could walk. A former SEAL alone in the woods, dogs that may not belong to him, old trauma, obsession. Graham stopped beside his truck, feeling something colder than the Montana air settle in his chest. Calder was not trying to take Mara first. He was trying to take away Graham's right to be believed. And for a man whose worst memory already lived beneath an official report, that was a cruelty almost perfectly aimed. By the time Graham returned to the cabin, The bright day had shifted toward afternoon gold. Nadine Pierce was already there. Her green Subaru sat near the porch, and she stood by the shed with a plastic bin of clean towels tucked against one hip. In her pale blue winter coat and knitted cap, she looked small against the white yard. But Graham had begun to understand that Nadine's size had nothing to do with the amount of room she took up when something was wrong. "She ate," Nadine said as Graham stepped out of the truck. "Mara?" "A little. Only after the pups finished, and Pip tried walking." Graham looked toward the shed. "He did?" Nadine's mouth curved. 3 steps, dramatic fall, very brave. Inside the shed, the puppies were awake in a loose, clumsy cluster. Pip stood near Mara, legs trembling with effort. When he saw Graham, he tried to move forward. 1 step, another. Then his front paws slid on the blanket, and he tumbled gently into Graham's boot. For 1 second, Graham forgot to hold the world at a distance. A laugh escaped him, small, rough, almost unfamiliar. Pip looked up as if proud of himself. Nadine saw the laugh, but she had the mercy not to make a ceremony of it. She only placed the bin near the wall and added a folded towel to the rail. "There," she said, "for later." Graham crouched and steadied Pip with one hand. The puppy leaned into his palm, warm now, alive now. That tiny weight did something no official word had done for years. It reminded Graham that not every responsibility ended in loss. Some simply stood up, wobbled, and tried again. Mara watched from the blankets. Then her body changed. Her head lifted, her nostrils flared. The old scrap of fabric lay near Pip's paw, and the breeze from the open shed door stirred it slightly. Mara rose, crossed to it, and lowered her nose. She sniffed once, then again. Her ears angled forward. Graham became still. "What is it?" Nadine whispered. Mara picked up the fabric gently and walked to the shed doorway. She did not bolt. She did not pull. She simply stepped into the snow, turned toward the narrow path behind the cabin, and stopped. The path led away from the road, away from town, toward the frozen lake. Graham followed at a careful distance. Nadine came behind him, slower but determined, her boots crunching softly. Pip whined from the shed, but Mara did not turn back. She moved along the path with the cloth in her mouth, pausing every few yards to check behind her, as if making sure Graham was still there. The woods behind the cabin were bright and quiet. Sunlight pierced between the pines, throwing long blue shadows across untouched snow. The air smelled of sap, ice, and wood smoke drifting faintly from the chimney behind them. Mara led them down a shallow slope to the edge of the frozen lake, where old reeds poked through the snow and a weathered wooden post leaned near the shoreline. There she stopped. She dropped the cloth beside the post and looked at Graham. No command, no noise, only that steady insistence. Graham crouched. At first he saw nothing but snow packed around the base of the post. Then he noticed a tiny curve of metal, dull beneath the white. He brushed the snow away with his glove. A whistle lay half buried in the frozen crust. Not a cheap plastic whistle, a metal training whistle, scratched, worn, with a ring snapped clean through. Graham lifted it carefully. 2 letters were engraved near the side. O.K. Nadine drew in a breath. "Owen Kestrel?" Graham did not answer. He turned the whistle in his palm. It was cold enough to burn through the glove. Mara watched it with an intensity that hurt to see. She did not jump for it. She did not wag. She stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on the small metal object as if it belonged to a voice she had not heard in years. Graham called Tessa. She answered on the second ring. "I found something," he said. "What?" "A training whistle near the lake, initials OK. The line went quiet. Then Tessa said, "Do not touch anything else. Photograph it where it was." "I already picked it up." A tired breath. "Of course you did. It was half frozen. Photograph the location. Bag it clean if you can. And Graham?" "Yes?" "This doesn't mean Owen was there. It means someone wanted that whistle there. We don't know which yet." He looked at Mara. She had not taken her eyes off the whistle. Graham understood the warning.
Evidence could be a trail. It could also be bait. Back at the cabin, as sunset lowered behind the trees, Tessa called again. Her voice had changed. "Calder filed a formal notice," she said. Graham stood in the kitchen, the whistle sealed in a clear bag on the counter. "What kind of notice?" "Temporary recovery request for animals under disputed ownership, submitted through Harold Vane's office."
It claims the adult female and associated litter may require evaluation at a licensed facility. Graham closed his eyes. How long? 48 hours before they can push for removal if we don't challenge it. The cabin seemed to shrink around him. In the shed beyond the window, Mara lay with Pip and the other puppies tucked against her body. For the first time that day, she looked almost peaceful. Not safe, never fully safe, but close. Tessa's voice softened. "I'm working on it." Graham opened his eyes. He wanted to say that working on it would not be enough. He wanted to say that waiting had cost him once before. He wanted to say that rules felt clean only to people who had never watched someone disappear while orders held them in place. But across the yard, Pip lifted his head and looked toward the cabin. Small, trusting, alive because Graham had not closed the door. Graham lowered his voice. "Tell me what you need." "Stay where you are," Tessa said. "Keep them safe. And don't let Calder turn you into his proof." After the call ended, Graham remained by the dark window. Outside, the winter sky faded to deep blue. Smoke rose from the chimney. The town below began to glow with evening lights, warm and harmless from a distance. In the shed, Mara opened her eyes. She looked toward the house, then toward the road. Graham placed one hand against the glass. If the law was being bent into a weapon, then doing the right thing would take more than courage. It would take restraint. And restraint, Graham knew, was sometimes the cruelest battlefield of all. The 48 hours began with a sound Graham Vale hated. Not a siren, not a warning shot, a printer. In Sheriff Tessa Marlowe's office, the machine clicked and hummed as it pushed out Calder Rusk's formal recovery notice page by page. Each sheet slid into the tray with a soft mechanical certainty, as if the truth were nothing more than something that could be formatted, signed, and filed. Graham stood near the window, broad shoulders held square beneath his fitted long-sleeve green camouflage shirt, clean-shaven jaw tight, silvered undercut neat as always. Outside, Whitefish looked harmless in the winter light. Snow rested on parked cars. A woman crossed the street with a paper coffee cup. Two older men stood near the courthouse steps talking about road salt. Inside, a living dog was being turned back into a document. Tessa pulled the pages from the printer. She was calm, but Graham knew enough about calm people to hear the strain beneath it. Her dark navy sheriff's jacket hung over the back of her chair, and she stood in a black turtleneck with sleeves pushed to the forearms, reading each line with a stillness that meant she was angry but refusing to spend that anger too soon. "Temporary recovery request," she said. "Submitted through Harold Vane's office. Calder claims Mara and the litter are animals under disputed ownership and may require evaluation at a licensed facility." Graham looked at the paper. "Evaluation," he repeated. "That's the word they chose. They mean removal." "I know what they mean." His eyes lifted to hers. "Can you stop it?" "I can challenge it. I can delay it. I can ask questions hard enough that someone gets nervous." She set the papers down. "But I cannot tear it up because I believe your dog is telling the truth." Your dog. The phrase struck him harder than he expected. Mara was not his. Not legally. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But somewhere between the morning she stood outside his cabin with 6 puppies and the night she rested her tired head near his boots, Graham had stopped thinking of her as a problem that had arrived. She had become a responsibility. And responsibilities, once accepted, had teeth. Tessa opened another folder. Wesley found a contact for Owen Kestrel. Graham turned fully. "Where?" "Idaho. Lives outside Coeur d'Alene. No current canine work. No public complaints. No recent employment records tied to animal handling." "Because the file ruined him." "Maybe," Tessa's voice was careful, "or maybe there's more to it. Graham heard what she was doing. She was keeping the door open both ways. That was her job. But he felt the familiar irritation rise anyway. Tessa looked up. Don't do that. Do what? Decide I'm against you because I won't skip the part where we prove things. Graham looked away. She was right, and that made it worse. A few minutes later, Wesley Boone joined by video call from what looked like a cluttered workshop. He appeared on Tessa's laptop screen as a compact, weathered man of 53, broad through the chest, with close-cropped salt and pepper hair and sun-browned skin deeply lined around sharp eyes. He wore an olive work jacket over a thermal shirt. Behind him hung old leashes, training dummies, and shelves of labeled storage boxes. Wesley did not waste words. I found Owen's number, he said, but don't expect him to welcome this. Why? Graham asked. Because the last time he told the truth made him homeless in every way that matters. Wesley dialed from another phone and patched the call through. It rang 6 times. Then a man answered. Yes? The voice was dry, guarded, and tired in a way Graham recognized before a face ever appeared. Not physical fatigue, the deeper kind. The kind that came from explaining yourself for years and learning that people only listen long enough to decide you were trouble. Owen Kestrel? Tessa asked. Silence. Who is this? Sheriff Tessa Marlowe, Flathead County, Montana. I'm here with Graham Vale and Wesley Boone. We're calling about a German Shepherd from the old Maribel file. The line went very still. Then Owen said, I don't discuss that program. Wesley leaned toward his camera. Owen, it's Boone. Another pause. I know your voice, Owen said. Doesn't change my answer. Graham stepped closer to the laptop. She's alive. No response. Mara, Graham said. K9 MR417, she's alive. The breath on the other end caught so softly that Graham almost missed it. That isn't funny. No. She died. She didn't. You don't know what you're talking about. Graham's jaw tightened, but he forced his voice low. She's at my cabin with 6 puppies, black and tan coat, left ear tattoo, watches doors before she eats, won't take food until the pups do, responds to hand signals before verbal commands. The line filled with silence again. When Owen spoke, the defense in his voice had cracked, but only enough to let pain through. Don't call me again. The call ended. For a moment, no one moved. Then Wesley exhaled. That went better than I expected. Graham stared at the deadline. That was better? He didn't curse us out. Tessa closed the laptop halfway. We need him. No, Graham said quietly. Mara needs him. That evening, back at the cabin, Graham recorded the video. He did not stage it, he did not call Mara forward or try to make her perform grief for a camera. He simply sat on the crate in the shed while the puppies slept, set the phone on his knee, and played a short audio clip Wesley had found from an old training log. The recording crackled with age. A younger male voice came through, warmer than Graham expected. Maribel, easy, good girl, hold. Mara lifted her head. Her ears moved forward. The puppies stirred, but she did not look at them. She rose slowly and came toward the phone as if crossing not a shed floor, but 3 years of being erased. Her amber eyes fixed on the speaker. When the voice said her name again, she lowered her muzzle to the screen and breathed against it. Not frantic, not dramatic, only impossibly still. Graham felt his throat close. He sent the video to Owen without adding a message. 23 minutes passed, then his phone rang. Owen's voice was different this time, smaller, bare. She remembered me. Graham sat alone at the kitchen table, firelight moving across his face. Yes. I tried to get her out, Owen said. I know. No, you don't. A long breath. I filed complaints. I asked where the dogs were going. They said reassignment, then medical retirement, then closure. Every answer changed. When I pushed, they said I was compromised, too attached, too unstable to evaluate objectively. Graham closed his eyes. Too attached, too unstable. Words powerful people used when loyalty became inconvenient. What happened to you? Graham asked. They took the program badge. Then contracts stopped calling. Then friends stopped answering because standing next to me became bad for their own records. Owen laughed once, without humor. Eventually, I learned silence was cheaper. Graham looked toward the dark window. Beyond it, the shed held Mara and her sleeping litter. I know something about that. Owen was quiet a moment. Wesley told me you were a SEAL. Was. That kind of thing doesn't leave because the paperwork says it ended. Graham opened his eyes. No one had put it that way before. Owen continued. Mara was trained with a fallback protocol. If separated from her handler under stress, she would search for a safety combination. Familiar scent, known signal pattern, calm command behavior. She wasn't trained to find a house. She was trained to find conditions that meant survival. The cloth Pip carried, Graham said. It smelled like you. Could have. I used dark field cloths with blue stitching in her early training, kept them in a scent kit. And the whistle? What whistle? Graham's body went still. The one near my lake, he said. Metal, initials OK. Owen's voice lost color. I still have my whistle. Graham said nothing. The fire snapped in the silence. Owen spoke more slowly. Then someone placed one there. Or made a copy. Either way, somebody wanted Mara drawn toward that place. A colder understanding moved through Graham. Mara had not stumbled into his life. She had been guided near it. Or baited. Owen's voice hardened for the first time. Who are you, Graham Vale? Graham looked down at his clean hands. Hands that had once known exactly what to do under fire and now trembled slightly on a kitchen table. A man she found, he said. No, Owen replied. A man someone expected her to find. Rehook. Before dawn, Graham woke to Mara standing outside his bedroom door. She had never entered the cabin on her own before. Graham had left the mudroom door cracked so he could hear the puppies if they stirred, but Mara had crossed the threshold silently and now stood in the hallway, black and tan body outlined by the faint glow from the dying fire. In her mouth, she carried Pip's old scrap of cloth. She placed it at Graham's feet. Then she looked not toward the shed, not toward the road, but at the drawer beneath the old military coat Graham never wore. Graham opened it slowly. Inside lay a folded field scarf from his last unit, sealed years ago in a plastic bag because he could not bear to touch it. Mara lowered her nose to the drawer and gave one quiet breath. Graham felt the room tilt. The cloth from Pip, the false whistle, the path to his cabin, none of it had been random. Someone had not only known Mara's training, someone had known enough about Graham to make his own past part of the trail. By late morning, Graham drove into town to meet Tessa. He did not want to leave the cabin, but they needed to challenge the recovery notice before the 48 hours narrowed any further. Nadine came over to stay with the dogs. She arrived in her pale blue winter coat with a thermos under one arm and a look on her face that said she would argue with any man who mistook kindness for weakness. I'll sit in the shed, she told Graham. If anyone comes, I call you and Tessa before I open my mouth. Nadine, I said before I opened my mouth. I didn't say I wouldn't open it. Despite everything, he felt the corner of his mouth move. Mara watched Graham leave from the shed doorway. She did not try to follow. That was the worst part. She trusted him to come back. At the county building, Tessa spread forms across a conference table. Wesley was on speakerphone. Owen had agreed to join by audio only. He was not ready to be seen. Graham understood that. Some wounds needed shadow before they could face light. They discussed fallback protocols, scent markers, ownership records, missing pages, Harold Vane's signatures, and Calder's recovery notice. Piece by piece, the shape grew clearer and more impossible. Someone had used old canine knowledge to draw Mara toward Graham's isolated cabin. Someone had then waited for Calder to claim the dog through official channels. If Graham reacted badly, the whole thing would collapse into a story about a traumatized veteran stealing animals. Tessa circled one line on the form. This notice doesn't authorize immediate seizure, she said. Not without a welfare justification or a county officer present. If they try, I need to know exactly who comes and what paper they show. Graham's phone rang. Nadine. He answered at once. Her voice came tight and low. Graham, there's a county animal control truck here.
Calder's with them. Graham stood so fast the chair scraped the floor. Tessa was already reaching for her jacket. Put her on speaker. Nadine continued, There's a young officer with paperwork. He looks nervous. Calder is telling him the adult female has to be evaluated at a licensed facility today. Do not physically interfere, Tessa said sharply. Record everything. Ask for names. Ask to see the document. I'm on my way. Graham was already moving. The drive back to the cabin felt longer than any road he had taken in years. His hands stayed steady on the wheel, but inside he was back in another place, another countdown, another moment where distance became the enemy. Snow flashed past the windshield. Tessa followed behind in her SUV, lights on but siren silent. By the time Graham reached the cabin, the animal control truck was pulling away. Calder's black pickup followed it down the drive. For 1 second, Graham saw her through the rear window of the truck's holding compartment. Mara, standing, not cowering, looking back toward the shed. Then the vehicles turned past the pines, gone. Graham stopped in the yard. The world went soundless. Nadine stood near the shed, phone in one trembling hand, face pale with anger. Beside her was a young county animal control officer, perhaps 28, thin and red-haired, with freckles across a worried face. His name tag read Mason Deller. He looked like a man who had followed instructions and only realized too late that instructions could be used to move a living thing from safety to danger. I had a signed request, Mason said, voice shaking. Mr. Rusk said the sheriff's office had been notified. I thought... Tessa stepped past Graham, controlled and cold. You thought wrong. Graham did not hear the rest. He walked to the shed. The puppies were still there, all 6. Pip stood at the edge of the blankets, trembling on his unsteady legs. He looked past Graham toward the empty doorway where his mother should have been. The little scrap of cloth lay on the floor near him. Mara's place on the blanket was still warm. That undid Graham more than the sight of the truck had. He crouched, but his knees nearly failed beneath him. Not again. The words did not come aloud, but they tore through him. Not again, not while I was away, not after she trusted me. Memory flooded in without mercy. Dust, radio static, a voice asking if anyone was coming, the order to pull back, the terrible discipline of leaving because command said the living still with him mattered more than the one behind. His keys were in his hand before he knew he had taken them out. Calder's facility was less than 20 minutes away. He could reach it. He could get her. He could fix this before another report, another signature, another polite lie swallowed her whole. Pip moved. The puppy stumbled off the blanket and came toward him. 1 step, a slip, another step. His little body shook with effort, but he kept going until he stood directly in front of Graham's boots. Then Pip sat, small, weak, blocking the door. Graham stared down at him. Pip looked up, brown eyes wide, the old fabric at his feet. He did not understand law. He did not understand Calder or Harold or temporary recovery orders. He only knew that Graham was leaving in the same hard silence that had once taken his mother away. The keys dug into Graham's palm. Behind him, Tessa's voice came from the yard, firm but distant. Graham? He did not turn. Pip leaned forward and pressed his tiny head against Graham's boot. That simple touch broke the rush inside him. Not because the need to save Mara had faded, because he finally understood the trap. Calder did not need to hide forever. He only needed Graham to arrive angry, alone, and exactly as advertised. A traumatized former SEAL. Unstable, obsessed, dangerous. Graham slowly opened his hand. The keys fell silent against his palm. He crouched and touched Pip's head with 2 fingers. I'm not leaving you, he whispered. His voice cracked on the last word. Pip closed his eyes. Tessa came to the shed doorway and stopped, giving him the dignity of not seeing too much. We'll get her back, she said. Graham looked at the empty blanket. Every instinct in his body still screamed to move, but for the first time in his life he understood that restraint was not the same as abandonment. Sometimes running toward the thing you loved was exactly how an enemy made sure you arrived too late. Graham picked up Pip and held him carefully against his chest. Outside, Calder's tire tracks cut dark lines through the clean snow. Graham watched them until they disappeared down the mountain road. This time he would follow, but not alone.
Graham Vale did not sleep after Mara was taken. By morning, the cabin felt different, as if the warmth had been removed from it, even though the fire was still alive and the heater in the shed still hummed. The 6 puppies slept in a broken cluster where their mother had been. Some pressed close to Pip, others twitched and whimpered in dreams, searching with their noses for a body that was no longer there. Pip stayed awake. The little German shepherd sat near the shed doorway, black and tan fur ruffled from restless movement, one ear half raised, the other folded soft against his head. He was still weak, still too small for the weight of the story that had fallen around him, but he watched Graham with an expression that felt painfully human in its trust. Graham stood by the workbench, both hands braced against the wood. His broad shoulders filled the green camouflage shirt he wore, the same clean, fitted, long-sleeved, uniform-like clothing that made him look composed even when he was not. His face remained clean-shaven and controlled, the strong jaw locked, the silvered undercut neat despite the sleepless night. But his eyes had changed. The sadness was still there, deep and old, but now something raw moved beneath it. Not rage alone. Rage was simple. This was worse. This was the feeling of having been placed back in the exact shape of his old failure. Someone trusted him. Someone was gone. And he was still standing here. Tessa Marlowe arrived before 8. Her sheriff's SUV stopped beside the cabin, tires crunching over the hard-packed snow. She stepped out in her dark navy winter jacket, cap pulled low, expression focused and grim. Nadine Pierce was already there, standing near the shed in her pale blue coat, arms folded tight against the cold. Her silver curls showed beneath her knitted cap, and her face carried the anger of a woman who had been polite for most of her life, but was now running out of patience with polite evil. Wesley Boone joined by video call from Graham's kitchen table. His weathered face filled the laptop screen, salt and pepper hair cropped short, olive work jacket zipped to the throat. Owen Kestrel stayed on audio only. His voice came through quietly, guarded, still carrying the ache of a man not fully ready to be seen. Graham stood apart from them for a moment. Then he said the thing he had never said to anyone. "I don't trust myself to save something without ruining it." The kitchen fell silent. Nadine looked away first, not because she was uncomfortable, but because she understood dignity. Tessa did not interrupt. Wesley's face tightened. On the phone, Owen breathed out slowly. Graham looked toward the shed window, where Pip sat watching. "I keep thinking if I had moved faster before, someone would still be alive. Then I think if I move too fast now, Calder gets exactly what he wants. I don't know where the line is anymore." Owen's voice came through the speaker, low and rough. "Then this time, don't draw the line alone." No one spoke after that. But something shifted, not the facts, not the danger. The danger was still there. Mara was still gone. Calder still had paperwork, influence, and a head start. What changed was Graham. He did not pick up his keys. He did not drive toward Rusk Canine Development with fury in his hands. He sat down at the kitchen table with Tessa, Nadine, Wesley, and Owen, and for the first time in years, he let other people stand inside the problem with him. Tessa started with the obvious trail. "Calder wants us to think Mara went to his main facility," she said, spreading printed stills from Nadine's video across the table. "The animal control truck left here, turned west, and was seen near his road 20 minutes later." Nadine leaned over the photographs. "That young officer said the same thing. Evaluation at Rusk's licensed facility." "Mason Deller," Tessa said. "I spoke to him again at 6 this morning. He's scared, but he's cooperating. He says Calder told him the sheriff's office had already been notified and that Harold Vane's office had cleared the removal." "Had you cleared it?" Graham asked. "No," Tessa's mouth hardened. She placed another image on the table, the entrance gate to Rusk Canine Development. Clean fencing, a bright sign, security camera angled clearly toward the driveway. Calder wanted a camera record. If Graham had gone there last night, angry and alone, the footage would have been perfect. Wesley nodded from the screen. Former SEAL trespasses after refusing lawful recovery notice. Exactly, Tessa said. That becomes the headline before we ever get to Mara.
Graham stared at the photo of the gate. He could see it too clearly. His truck sliding in too fast, his boots in the snow, his hands on a locked door. Calder calm inside, already recording. A man like Calder did not need truth if he could build a better-looking lie. Pip whined softly from the hallway. Graham turned. The puppy had left the shed again. He stood on the kitchen threshold, trembling from effort, the old cloth in his mouth. He crossed the floor in small, uneven steps and dropped the fabric beside Graham's boots. Then he looked toward the window facing the valley. Not toward the west road that led to Calder's facility, toward the lower road, the one that curved east and disappeared toward Flathead Valley. Wesley saw Graham's expression through the screen. What did he do? Graham picked up the cloth. Pip keeps bringing this to the door. Don't make him magic, Tessa warned gently. I'm not. Wesley leaned closer.
But don't ignore him either. A pup separated from its dam can fixate on scent. If that cloth was with Mara before she was taken, it may carry transfer scent. Vehicle floor, gloves, holding crate, old bedding. He isn't solving anything. He's grieving through his nose. Owen spoke quietly. Sometimes that's enough to tell you which lie smells wrong. Tessa considered this, then nodded once. We use it as a clue, not proof. That became the rhythm of the next hours. No single thing was enough, but together the pieces began to lean in one direction. Nadine's video showed the truck used in the removal had mud on the rear tires, not the clean snow residue expected from Calder's paved facility entrance. Mason Deller confirmed he was instructed to follow Calder only as far as the main road, then was told his assistance was complete. Dr. Lyle Brenner, after a night of conscience and fear, sent Tessa copies of several health certificates. Some had identical phrasing across different animals. One had a date that fell on a day his clinic had been closed. Tessa's deputy pulled traffic camera stills from 2 county intersections. Calder's pickup appeared near the road to his facility, then vanished for 12 minutes, then reappeared heading south on a service route toward Flathead Valley. Tessa marked the times in red pen. That's not enough for an arrest, she said. No, Graham replied, but it's enough to ask why. Wesley sent a scanned file from his old archive. Mara's tattoo code did not match any private transfer chain. Owen sent copies of old complaints he had filed before the program dissolved. The language was careful, professional, not unstable at all. He had questioned inconsistent medical closures, missing evaluation sheets, and dogs marked unavailable without handler review. One name appeared in the routing notes more than once. Harold Vane. Tessa sat back. There it was again, not loud, not dramatic, a signature in the right place. The kind of power that never had to raise its voice. By early afternoon, Tessa found the company name attached to a property outside Flathead Valley. Northline Agricultural Storage, LLC. It looked like an old farm supply warehouse on county land records. The listed compliance consultant from 2 years earlier was Harold Vane. Calder doesn't own it, Tessa said. Graham looked at the screen. But Harold touches it. Yes. Nadine's face had gone pale with anger. So the clean man in the charity photos has a storage company sitting under the mess. Tessa closed the folder. Maybe, maybe not. We proceed like we need a judge to believe every step. The word judge settled heavily over the room. Graham looked at Pip, who had fallen asleep beneath the kitchen chair, nose still pointed toward the old cloth. A creature grieving through scent. A man trying not to repeat history through anger. A town full of people who had looked away because looking closely would cost them something. Rehook. Just before Tessa left to file for emergency inspection authority, her phone rang. She answered, listened, and her expression changed in a way Graham had not seen before. Not fear, disappointment. She ended the call and stood very still. What? Graham asked. Tessa looked toward the window, then back at him. Someone inside my office accessed the Mara file last night. Graham said nothing. Not me, not my deputy, an administrative login. Nadine whispered, someone warned them? Tessa's jaw tightened. Maybe. For a moment, the room felt colder than the yard outside. Calder had not only reached the county records, he had reached the place Graham had finally chosen to trust. And if even Tessa's office had a weak door in it, then Mara's disappearance was no longer just a race against paperwork. It was a race against fear spreading through ordinary people. Tessa found out who it was before sunset. The administrative clerk was a man named Aaron Pike, 34, round-faced, sandy-haired, and mild in the way of people who apologize before asking for a chair. He had worked in the sheriff's office for 6 years, mostly handling records, permits, and front desk calls. He had a wife recovering from surgery and a mother whose medical bills Harold Vane had once helped reduce through a county assistance program. Aaron did not look like a traitor. That almost made it worse. Tessa brought him into the small conference room. Graham waited outside at first, but Tessa later let him hear the recording. Aaron's voice trembled through most of it. "Mr. Vane called," Aaron said. "He asked if there was any formal investigation. He said it was a licensing matter and that he needed to avoid duplicate paperwork. I didn't think—" Tessa's voice on the recording was controlled but cold. "You accessed an active file after hours." "I know. Then you called him back." A pause. "Yes." "Why?" Another pause, longer this time. "My wife's treatment grant. He helped us. I thought I owed him courtesy." "No," Tessa said. "You owed this office integrity." Aaron began to cry, quietly, not loudly, not theatrically, just a frightened man realizing that fear and gratitude had made him useful to someone else. Graham listened without satisfaction. He had expected a villain behind every leak. Instead, there was a tired clerk with bills, pressure, and shame. That made the whole thing feel larger. Calder and Harold did not need every person to be corrupt. They only needed enough people to be afraid at the right moment. By dusk, Tessa had what she needed for a limited emergency inspection request. Not a dramatic raid, not a revenge march, a lawful check based on conflicting animal identification, questionable removal procedure, possible document irregularities, and concern for the welfare of animals connected to a disputed ownership claim. Graham sat in the passenger seat of Tessa's SUV when they left the cabin. He carried no weapon that mattered to him. His hands rested on a folded blanket from the shed, one Pip and the other puppies had slept on. It held warmth, milk scent, cedar, and the unmistakable smell of the litter. If they found Mara, Graham did not want to approach her with force or command. He wanted to bring her the one thing no forged paper could imitate: her children. The road to the old agricultural warehouse cut through open white fields where the wind swept snow in thin ribbons across the pavement. Tessa drove. A county animal welfare officer followed behind them. Wesley stayed on video with Tessa's deputy, available if they needed identification. Owen remained on the phone, silent most of the time, breathing quietly like a man standing at the edge of a locked room from his past. The warehouse appeared near the edge of Flathead Valley as the sky turned blue-black. It was a long, low structure of corrugated metal and old timber, set back from the road behind a leaning fence. A faded sign still read Northline Feed and Storage, though the business had clearly been gone for years. Snow had drifted against the loading doors. One exterior light burned above the entrance, buzzing faintly in the cold. Tessa parked with care. "No rushing," she said. Graham nodded. "I mean it. I heard you." She looked at him. Hearing and obeying are different things. That struck too close to the old wound, but this time Graham did not flinch from it. "I know." They approached the warehouse with paperwork visible, flashlights low, voices calm. Tessa announced herself at the door. No answer. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of dust, old hay, cold metal, and something recently moved. The overhead lights were on. Folding tables stood against one wall. A few empty crates sat near the loading bay. Fresh tire tracks marked the concrete floor, damp where snow had melted from vehicle wheels. But there were no dogs, no people, no Mara. Graham stood in the middle of the room, the folded blanket in his arms, feeling the silence gather around him. Tessa swept her flashlight across the floor. "They cleared it," Wesley's voice crackled through the phone speaker. Look for residue, hair, feed bags, anything with labeling. Graham's eyes moved slowly, not panic now. He forced himself to see the room instead of the absence. Crate marks in dust, a water bowl tipped on its side, a strip of tan fur caught on a splinter near the loading door. Then Tessa stopped. Graham? At the far end of the warehouse, hanging from a nail driven into a wooden post, was a metal training whistle. Not the one Graham had found by the lake. This one looked newer, deliberately cleaned, suspended by a short piece of blue field cloth. The initials engraved on it were the same. OK. Owen's breath broke over the phone. That's not mine, he said. Graham stared at the whistle. No dogs, no people, only a false echo of the man Mara remembered, left behind like a signature by someone cruel enough to understand loyalty and use it as bait. Tessa did not touch it. She photographed it from 3 angles, then looked at Graham. This was staged. Graham looked toward the loading bay doors, where the tire tracks led out into the dark. Yes. The trap had not been at Calder's kennel. The trap had not even been this warehouse. This place was a message. Someone had known they were coming. Someone had moved Mara again. And whoever had left the whistle wanted them to understand one thing clearly. They were still following a story written by someone else. Graham tightened his hold on the puppy blanket. For a moment, the old fury came back, hot and immediate. Then he breathed. Once, twice. He thought of Pip standing in the doorway, too weak to stop a man by force but strong enough to stop him by trust. He thought of Owen's voice, don't rescue alone. Then Graham looked at Tessa and said, what's the next legal step? Tessa's eyes held his for a long second. Something like respect passed between them. We follow the tracks, she said, correctly. Outside, the wind moved across Flathead Valley, sweeping snow over the old road, trying to soften every mark. But this time, Graham was not chasing alone in the dark. This time, there were witnesses. This time, the silence had begun to break. The empty warehouse did not break Graham Vale. A month earlier, maybe it would have. A year earlier, he might have stood in that cold room with the false whistle hanging from the post and let the old voice inside him say what it had always said. Too late, again. But now he only stood still. The concrete floor of the North Line warehouse held more truth than the clean papers ever had. Damp tire marks crossed the dust near the loading bay. A few strands of black and tan fur clung to a splintered crate. Near the side exit, shallow scratch marks scored the floor in short, deliberate lines. Graham crouched beside them. He was still wearing the same fitted, long-sleeved green camouflage set, the sleeves clean but dusted at the cuffs now, his dark boots planted carefully on the cold concrete. His strong, clean-shaven jaw was tight, silvered undercut neat despite the long night, but his deep-sad eyes were no longer clouded by panic. Tessa Marlowe stepped beside him, flashlight angled low. "What do you see?" she asked. "Not panic," Graham said. Owen Kestrel's voice came through Tessa's phone, thin with strain. "Describe it." Graham looked closer. 3 short marks, space, 3 more, all near the doorframe. Too even for a dog clawing randomly. Owen was quiet for a second, then his breath shook. "I taught her that." No one moved. Graham looked at the phone. "If she was moved from a fallback point," Owen said, "she was trained to mark direction when she could. Not words, not a code people would understand, just something to make a handler look twice." Tessa lifted her light toward the side exit. Beyond the door, the snow outside had been disturbed by tires and footprints, but wind had softened the edges. The tracks led away from the main road, toward a service lane running along the lower side of the valley. Graham touched the folded puppy blanket under his arm. Mara had been here, and even after being taken again, she had not stopped trying to lead someone back. Tessa straightened. "We follow the marks as far as they hold, legally, carefully." Graham nodded. He did not ask to go first. That mattered. Outside, dawn began to pale behind the mountains. The sky over Flathead Valley opened in layers of blue and rose, and the snow caught the first light until the fields looked almost holy.
It was the kind of morning that made evil seem impossible from a distance. The service lane wound past old irrigation ditches and dormant fields, then narrowed near a forgotten greenhouse complex at the edge of the valley. The place must once have grown winter herbs or starter plants for farms. Now the long glass roofs were cracked in places, their metal ribs glittering with frost. Snow had gathered inside some of the broken panels, laying white across the dead planting beds like folded linen. It was beautiful. That made Graham's chest hurt. A county animal welfare unit arrived behind them. The lead officer was Elena Ortiz, 41, a compact woman with warm brown skin, black hair braided tightly beneath a wool cap, and calm dark eyes that seemed trained to lower the temperature of any room she entered. She wore a gray insulated field jacket with a county animal welfare patch on the sleeve, dark utility pants, and rubber-soled winter boots. Elena moved quietly, spoke softly, and carried herself like someone who had seen frightened animals teach frightened humans how to slow down. "We go gentle," Elena said to her 2 staff members. "No shouting, no fast grabs, blankets first, food second, paperwork later." Tessa showed the emergency inspection order. Elena read it, nodded once, and handed it back. Graham stood behind them with the folded blanket in his arms. Tessa glanced at him. "You stay where I can see you." "I know." She studied his face, perhaps expecting argument. There was none. The greenhouse door was not locked. That worried everyone more than a lock would have. Inside, the air was cold and wet, carrying the smell of old soil, metal, and animals that had been moved too often. Light came through the broken panes in pale beams, touching rows of empty planting tables and plastic sheeting. Somewhere deeper inside, a dog gave a low, uncertain sound. Elena raised one hand. Everyone stopped. Then she spoke into the quiet. "Easy. We're not here to hurt you." They moved slowly. There were dogs inside, held in temporary enclosures made from portable panels. Not many, but enough to make the silence feel heavy. German shepherds, a Belgian Malinois, and 2 mixed working dogs watched from behind the wire. Their bowls were present but cold. Their bodies were tense. None rushed the panels. None barked wildly. They watched the humans with the exhausted caution of animals who had learned that people could arrive with either food or trouble. Graham did not look away. He also did not let the story become spectacle in his mind. He had seen enough suffering to know that staring could become its own kind of trespass. So he saw what mattered: fear, restraint, waiting. Then he saw her. Mara stood at the far end of the greenhouse, behind a panel near a row of cracked planting trays. Her black and tan coat was dull from stress, her body tired, but her stance remained unbroken. She had placed herself in front of 2 smaller dogs, blocking them from the aisle with the same quiet authority she had used with her puppies. Even taken from her own litter, she was still guarding. Graham's breath caught. He did not move toward her. Every part of him wanted to. Every instinct in his body told him to close the distance, open the gate, put his hands on her fur, and prove she was real. But trust was not something a man could seize because he had missed it before. He lowered himself to one knee several feet away. Then he unfolded the blanket. The scent of Pip and the puppies rose into the cold air. Milk, cedar, wool, the warm little smell of sleeping bodies. Mara's head lifted sharply. Her ears came forward, her eyes fixed on the blanket. Graham placed it on the floor, then he backed away. Owen entered behind him. For the first time, Graham saw the man whose name had opened a locked place inside Mara. Owen Kestrel was 54, lean and worn, with short silver-gray hair, a narrow face, high cheekbones, and eyes that looked older than the rest of him. He wore a faded gray-green canvas winter jacket over a dark sweater, work pants and old boots polished by use rather than pride. He had the careful movements of a man who had learned not to expect welcome, but his hands shook when he saw Mara. He stopped beside Graham. For several seconds he could not speak. Then, barely louder than breath, he said, "Maribel." Mara froze. The name moved through the greenhouse more softly than wind, but every person there felt it land. Mara's ears rose fully. Her eyes shifted from the blanket to Owen.
He took one step, then stopped himself, as if remembering she had the right to decide. "Easy," he whispered. "Good girl. Hold." Mara stared at him. Then she stepped forward. One step, another. Her paws touched the blanket. She lowered her head, breathed in the scent of her puppies, and a tremor passed through her body. Then she crossed the last few feet to the gate, where Elena had already opened the latch. Mara did not leap. She did not collapse. She simply walked to Owen and pressed her muzzle into his open hand. Owen bent over her, not hugging, not trapping, only letting his hand rest against the side of her face. "I came back too late," he said, voice breaking. Mara closed her eyes. Graham looked away. Not because he wanted to miss it, because some reunions were sacred enough to be given privacy, even in a broken greenhouse with county officers watching. When Mara opened her eyes again, she turned her head toward Graham. Their gazes met, and in that look, Graham felt something inside him loosen. She was not accusing him. She was not asking where he had been. She had followed the only path she could make, and he had followed it without destroying himself. For the first time in years, he had arrived without becoming the very danger he feared. Rehook. As Elena's team began moving the other dogs gently into warm transport crates, one of her staff called from a side office. "Sheriff, you need to see this." Inside the office, beneath a stack of blank feed invoices, Tessa found a narrow binder with no label. Most of it held transport numbers and initials, but one page stopped everyone cold. It listed Mara's code, K9-MR417. Beside it was not Calder's name. It was Graham's, not as owner, as intended civilian recovery point. The room went silent. Graham stared at the words, feeling the old cold enter his bones again. Someone had not merely used his past after Mara found him. Someone had written him into the plan before she ever reached his porch. And that meant Mara's arrival had been both a cry for help and a move in someone else's game. The binder changed everything. Tessa photographed every page before touching it further. Elena called for an evidence bag. Wesley, watching over video, went quiet when Tessa read the line aloud. Owen stood beside Mara with one hand resting lightly near her shoulder, face pale with recognition. "That format," Owen said, "those are internal routing notes." "Who would have access?" Tessa asked. "Program administrators, compliance people, anyone handling closures, transfers, disposal logs." "Harold," Graham said. Tessa did not answer immediately, but her face confirmed what the room already understood. A county official with old program access, licensing power, and public trust had not simply helped Calder hide dogs afterward. Harold Vane had known enough to use people as locations. Graham's isolation, military background, and trauma had not been incidental. They had made him useful. If he reacted badly, he became the unstable veteran in the report. If he complied quietly, Mara disappeared. Either way, the truth stayed buried. But the plan had failed in one place. Mara had remembered too much, and Graham had not gone alone. By late afternoon, Calder Rusk was found at his main facility, still insisting that the greenhouse had nothing to do with him. He looked polished even then, in his dark coat and clean boots, but the controlled smile no longer sat easily on his face. He claimed he had followed county documents, claimed temporary holding locations were handled by outside contractors, claimed Harold Vane's office had directed the chain. Harold Vane did not appear in person. He sent a statement through an attorney first, distancing himself from Calder. But the binder, the company records, the inspection signatures, the recovery notice, the altered transfer chain, Nadine's video, Brenner's documents, Wesley's archive, Owen's complaints, the traffic footage, and Mara's living tattoo created a line too solid to wave away. The consequences did not happen with shouting. They happened with signatures reversed, licenses suspended, phones seized under warrant, and doors that had stayed closed for years finally opening. Calder was charged with document fraud, unlawful trafficking of working dogs through falsified ownership records, and violations related to animal holding conditions. Harold Vane was suspended from his county position pending investigation, removed from the licensing board, and placed under formal review for his role in the false records and shell company. Dr. Lyle Brenner was not cleared without consequence, but his cooperation and records helped expose the chain. Mason Deller was disciplined for acting beyond proper confirmation, though Tessa noted his later cooperation. Justice arrived without spectacle. That made it feel more real. Mara rode back to Graham's cabin that evening, wrapped in the puppy blanket. Owen sat beside her in the back of the welfare van for the first part of the ride, his hand near her but never holding her in place. Graham followed in Tessa's SUV. He watched the van ahead through the windshield as the road climbed back toward the cabin, the sky softening into violet dusk. When they arrived, Nadine was waiting by the shed. The puppies sensed their mother before they saw her. Pip was first to reach the doorway. He stumbled forward, stronger than before, but still clumsy, his small black and tan body shaking with effort. When Elena opened the van, Mara stepped down carefully. Pip ran the last few feet. He crashed into her front legs with a sound between a whine and a sigh. The other puppies tumbled after him, surrounding her in a small, trembling storm of noses and paws. Mara lowered her head and checked each one. Pip's face, another puppy's ear, a tiny paw, a warm belly, one by one, as if counting the living back into the world. Only after she had touched them all did she lie down on the old blanket near the shed heater. Graham stood in the doorway. His eyes were red, but no tears fell. Nadine came beside him and placed one small hand on his arm. "You were here this time," she said. The words almost undid him. He looked at Mara, at Pip, at the puppies pressed into their mother's side. "I almost wasn't." "But you were." The weeks after that did not look like victory. They looked like appointments, forms, quiet feedings, careful introductions, veterinary checks, warm baths, and slow trust. Elena's team helped evaluate the rescued dogs. Wesley came to Montana and took temporary care of the weakest puppy, a shy little female with a dark muzzle and watchful eyes. Owen adopted one of Mara's sons, not because he wanted to replace what had been stolen, but because he was ready to keep one promise all the way through. Graham adopted Mara and Pip. Not all of them, that mattered too. He had learned that love was not ownership, and rescue was not keeping everything close because fear said letting go was loss. The other puppies went to vetted homes, a retired couple outside Kalispell, a Forest Service dispatcher, a quiet ranch woman who had worked with shepherds before. Nadine helped every step of the way, clipboard in hand, asking questions no one dared answer lazily. Winter softened, then returned in gentle flurries. Months later, on a bright morning with light snow drifting through sunshine, Graham woke to the sound of tires on the road. For a moment, the old tension rose. Then Pip barked once from the foot of the bed. Not fear, but joy. Graham opened the cabin door. Outside, several vehicles were parked along the drive. Nadine stood near the porch, smiling into her scarf. Wesley leaned against his truck with the little female shepherd beside him, healthier now, tail moving in slow sweeps. Owen stood a few steps back with Mara's son at his side, one hand resting on the dog's neck. Tessa had come too, out of uniform for once, wearing a simple dark coat and carrying a paper bag of biscuits. And there, in the snow before the porch, were Mara's puppies. Nearly grown now, black and tan, awkward and beautiful, lined in a loose row as if some old memory of that first morning still lived in their bodies. But everything was different. The first time, they had stood before Graham's door because cold, hunger, and fear had brought them there. Now they stood there because they knew the way home. Mara came to Graham's side, strong and calm, her amber eyes clear. Pip pushed between Graham's boots, no longer trembling, his once folded ear now almost fully upright, though still crooked enough to make Nadine laugh every time she saw him. Graham's phone rang from inside the cabin. He glanced at the screen. It was the local veterans group again. They had invited him twice before. Both times he had let the call go unanswered. This time, with Mara beside him, in the pack waiting in the snow, he answered. "Graham Vale," he said. A voice on the other end asked if he was still willing to come by that weekend. Graham looked out at the bright winter morning, at the dogs, at the people who had stayed. "Yes," he said quietly, "I'll be there." He ended the call and opened the door wider. One by one, the dogs came inside. Not rushing, not desperate, just entering the warmth like it belonged to them. The cabin filled with the sound of paws on wood, soft laughter, the rustle of coats, the crackle of fire. Mara lay near the hearth, Pip dropped beside her with a satisfied sigh, and Graham stood for a moment in the doorway before stepping in and closing it gently against the snow. He did not feel healed, not completely. Maybe some wounds did not close like doors, maybe they became rooms one learned to enter without fear. But as the morning light moved across the floor and the pack settled around the fire, Graham understood something he had not believed for years. He had not opened the door only for Mara. She had opened one in him, and for the first time in a long time, he was willing to walk through. Sometimes the hardest rescue is not the one that asks us to run forward, but the one that asks us to stay steady, tell the truth, and refuse to let fear make our choices for us. Graham could have gone alone. He could have let anger decide. But in the end, he saved Mara, not by becoming louder than the lie, but by standing patiently with the truth until others could see it too. Maybe in our own lives, we all face moments like that. A moment to look away or to speak gently. A moment to protect what is vulnerable, even when doing the right thing costs us comfort. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what Mara and Graham's journey meant to you. And if you believe in stories of loyalty, quiet courage, and second chances, please subscribe and stay with us. May you find peace in the places where life has tested you, and may you never forget that even one small act of courage can bring the truth home.